In a frosty mountaintop named Barden's Peak, there, in the darkness of night, walked a cloaked being in the harsh snow. As gusts of rain and wind hits this being, it holds its hood down, trying to cover its face from the freezing cold. Once more, a gust of wind hits this being, making it turn its head against the wind, noticing then two light sources lower down the mountain near the base. It seemed to be getting closer. The being decided to head to the destination as fast as possible. Near the summit of the mountain, off the side was a jut of stone, shielding the snow and rain from hitting a cave entrance. The being gets to the piece of stone looking behind, seeing only frost and snow. So it decides to take off the hood, believing it was safe, well for now at least. Taking of the hood to show a female tiefling with pure red skin and brown hair with horns like a goat, dark red eyes with yellow pupils with a pointed cleft chin. She then walks into the mouth of the cave where it got darker. She puts her hand against the wall, attempting to find a small enough root that she could pull of the wall. Eventually she does, pulling it from the wall with minimal damage to the cave. With a sigh, she mutters with cold air escaping her mouth. Solace. Once she said that word, the tip of the stick lit on fire. Happy about this, she then continues on further into the cave. As the darkness creeped around her, she continues walking. The further she got in, she notices brightly colored mushrooms that lit up with each step she took. Going down the path, she meets a crossroads, one going left and the other right. The right side was cloaked in darkness and the left had the luminescent mushrooms. She decides to go left as it was the brighter route, leaving the stick behind herself, as it was bright enough to walk without it. As she continued, she came across a dead end. Itching her head in frustration, she tries to think on what to do, tapping her fingers on her head. She notices the mushrooms light up with each tap. She thought for a while, walking back and forth. Eventually, she concludes to feel the wall in front of her. Feeling around the wall, she comes across a loose stone. So she pulls, feeling nothing, then pushing it in, and the stone wall started to rattle. Dust fell, and the wall moved into the side. Wiping the dust away from her face, she lets out a cough. As the dust settled, she stood there in the complete darkness because of the dust covered what mushrooms there were around her. She then held out her hand and said once more, Solace. But this time, instead of a stick, it was her hand that produced a flame. The flame emerged from her palm. She then continues further down the path, where she comes across a cave opening that led into a large cavern. Walking out onto the piece of land, she looks into the enormous cavern that stood in front of her. It was held up by a pillar of white-stoned quartz surrounded by water. Around that, out of the water, stood stalagmites, and on the ceiling hung stalactites dripping more water into the mass below. Light bounced of the water, hitting each part of the cave, making the pillar seem celestial with its glow. She looked on Gob, struck, unable to say a word upon seeing this peaceful place. Eventually she comes to her senses and she mutters, Stad, putting out the flame. Looking to her side, she notices rotten wooden steps leading down to the bottom of the cavern. Seeing no other option down, she steps onto the first step of the rotten wood, breaking through it. She quickly holds onto the flimsy railing, stabilizing herself. Well, to what stability there was, so? She continues down to the bottom step, slowly and carefully, getting down to the bottom of the steps, with the last few beneath the water, feeling like she had no other choice. She steps into the waist-high water, surprised at this, as she thought it would be deeper. Continuing trudging towards the pillar in the center of the cavern, hearing noises as she crosses. She looks around, observing the area. Seeing nothing around her, she continues forth, getting across rather easily. She thought to herself that it might have been harder to cross, but she wasn't complaining. Getting to the other side, she stands on the dry enough land, shaking off what water she could, sighing as she looked at the pillar, noticing a jut of stone where she can sit. Sitting on the stone, she takes of her boots one after the other, pouring the water out of them, looking to the cavern entrance to see if she was safe. No one stood at the entrance, giving a sigh seeing no one. She finished pouring what water was left in the boot. Feeling that she was somewhat safe, the tiefling puts both boots back on, stands up saying, Che. Her body started to steam from the heat of the magic, she said. She lets this happen until her clothes were dry. Once the clothes were fully dry, She utters, "Stad." Nodding her head in achievement, the steaming from her body stopped. She then turns, seeing a passageway that led into the lone pillar. Walking into the center of the pillar stood a large stone slab. As she walks in, up against the wall, she notices the slab had something written on it. Wiping the cobwebs away, she sees scratches. She says in curiosity, "Ogum?" Looking around the room, she sees a stone altar, and around the walls, hammered into the stone, was candle holders with half of a candle in each one. She utters, "Chinni," as she clicks her fingers, lighting up what candles there was. With that done, the light from the candles bounced off the white stone, lighting up the inside of it like it was day. Reaching in her pouch, she pulls out a piece of paper, and on the paper written on it was a poem written in Ogum. Sighing with relief, she murmurs, "Thank the Father it didn't get wet. I can still read it. Yes, good." With the piece of paper reading, var sliv snachta, egen buik is ard, Shayan kolon awan, ta eru anshaw, tor pisa diat fein, Ker glia erdo anyam, agus kaj yudi ni kaura. Reading this, she commits it to memory, and again she says, "Chin ni," lighting up the piece of paper from her fingertip. She walks to the altar thinking on what to do, what part of her to give. But before she could decide, she could overhear voices coming through the mouth of the cavern entrance. Knowing she had to hurry, she pulled out her knife and said, "I am Shira. I give my blood to you to summon a being who can help my people, so come forth." Cutting the palm of her hand, blood drops on the altar. She then puts the knife away back in her pouch. Once the blood hit the altar floor, nothing. In confusion, she shouts, "What?" Seconds pass that felt like minutes, with nothing happening, her hands trembling now both with fear and anger. Turning around, she decides to walk off, giving up, until she sees a shine hit against the wall. Turning around, Shira sees a shining portal that illuminated a multicolored hue, ranging from blue, yellow, white, and black. She just stands there in shock and confusion, not knowing on what to do. She stands there, not taking her eyes off the portal. Hyping herself up, Shira walks slowly to it, reaching close to it. She listens to the portal as she could hear a small murmur come from it. Listening to it closer, Shira could hear a screaming voice coming closer through the portal. Then, as the sound got to its loudest, it just stopped. Once it stopped, two beings fell out from it. She stepped back, not knowing what was going to happen. The first being was a dark figure that immediately disappeared, flying up and out of this cavern. Then the second being was a man. That man fell out of the portal unconscious, flopping on top of her completely nude, making both fall to the ground, sighing once more in frustration. Shira pushes the limp body off herself. Noticing it was a human, to her confusion, she utters, Why are you human?" "I are." Saying those words, she stands there in silence, hearing the voices from the entrance once more, but this time they were louder. The voices said, "Where is that horned devil?" Running out of the pillar, looking out of the jut, she sees the two humans standing at the entrance. They were the ones that followed her up the mountain, angry and frustrated. Shira runs back into the room, thinking on what to do. Looking at the man, clicking her fingers, trying to come up with a plan, pacing back and forth, putting her hands to her head in anger, tapping her fingers on her head, coming to a thought that might work.